Okay. I'll just put some information in the chat. Ooh, that's a lot. And hello, everyone. So let's start. My name is Katerina, and I'm glad to welcome you to this very first laser talk organized by the JRC, by JRC SciArt, which is the Art and Science program of the Joint Research Centre at the European Commission. The topic of today's talk on Naturarchy is also the topic of the work that we have been developing throughout these past 2.5 years at the intersection of art, science and policy making. So the JRC develops independent scientific research in support of EU policies, and our work in art science is thus embedded in this science for policy interface, and it makes things quite exciting. So before we start discussions and I give the floor to our fantastic moderator and project leader, Adriaan, who's here with us, if you could allow me a few words to explain what we've done so far in Naturarchy and where we stand. So since 2000 and, sorry, I'm just making Claudia also a panelist. There she is. Since 2022, Naturarchy has created the space, the time and the conditions to explore issues of deep ecology, of strong sustainability and the decolonisation of nature in a transdisciplinary manner. That is by bringing together artistic research, scientific inquiry, decision making and communities or local communities to investigate, to envision and co-create. So Naturarchy started off as a curatorial note and an open call. That's all we had. Over 200 applications were received for this open call, and 22 artists were selected to participate at a summer school. The summer school took place at the JRC, the Naturarchy Summer School, and it was certainly very enriching. We saw about 100 people come together for 5 days, amongst which also philosophers, economists, lawyers, curators, activists, students, and we all together, we further explored and elaborated on and probed issues ranging from the rights of nature and ecological jurisprudence to green technologies and nature-based solutions. Also, importantly, we investigated or we spoke about indigeneity and vernacular knowledge in relation to scientific knowledge, non-human agency and the possibility of decentering the human. And last but not least, degrowth, or what we call here the Commission beyond growth. So you can find more information on our website. I put the link here. I'll put it again because it didn't take, the chat didn't take it. So following from this summer school, 15 artists were then invited to continue their research at the JRC via our residency program. So at the moment we have commissioned 13 artworks that have resulted from this research. And these works will be featured at the Naturarchy exhibition that will be taking place this coming spring in May in Brussels. So of course we very much look forward to experiencing these final artworks that delve in. This is a quite a list, keep tight. So they delve into wildfires, soil health and soil dignity, lithium extraction and contested waters, human and more than human in relation to Nature 2000 sites, water contamination cocktails, endocrine disruptors, indigenous farming practices and cosmologies, unseen ecologies of the Oslo fjords, pollinator networks and complex systems and tipping points. So now today's talk wants to celebrate the incredible work that has been developed collectively throughout these years by coming together and exchanging on some of the, I guess, most relevant or most of the topics that have been of most particular interest to us. So we hope you will enjoy the provocations and that they can somehow catalyze action and synergies We do look forward to your comments, thoughts, and questions, prospects. So please, please share in the chat. Another few words. Today is a new collaboration. So today's talk is a new collaboration between the JRC and the Leonardo Laser Talks. So I'll just say a few words about this. The Leonardo Laser Talk is a program of international gatherings that bring artists, scientists, humanists, and technologists together for informal presentations, for performances, conversations with the wider public. So the mission of Laser is to encourage contribution to the cultural environment of a region by fostering interdisciplinary dialogue and opportunities for community building. And this is done in over 50 cities in 5 continents worldwide. So here at the SciArt project, we're very proud to be part of the network and contribute to the fostering this transformation at the nexus of art, science, and society. As is stated in the Laser mission, complex problems require creative and collective solutions. So we're very glad to be able to contribute to that. You'll find more information about Leonardo and Laser in the link in the chat. So also perhaps a few housekeeping rules. You must have seen that the format today is that of a webinar. So the panelists are not able to see you. However, and we do hope for exchange and discussion, as I said earlier. So you're warmly welcome to share any thoughts and notes in the chat. Raise your hand, and we will unmute you, and you'll be able to take the floor and voice your thoughts. So I think that's it from my side. Thank you for bearing with me so far. Adriaan, I think the floor is yours, and have fun.
Thank you so much, Katerina, and welcome to all to this first laser talk of the SciArt project. I'm honored to be here, and I'm also honored to be in the presence of these 4 excellent people that we have for today. And we will have Roger John Palmesino, who is the curator of the Lisbon Architecture Biennale of 2025. We have Filipa Ramos, a writer and curator at the Institute of Art, Gender and Nature in Basel, and of whom we have to commend the courage to take over from Truus Martinez on a very, very short notice. We have Roger Strands, who is a professor at the Center for the Study of Sciences and Humanities at the University of Bergen in Norway, who will talk about his work that he's doing with the European Environmental Agency in Copenhagen. And we hope to have a little bit later Dirk de Kerkhoven, who is the former director of the McLuhan program in culture and technology at the university in Toronto. He's still busy, but he might join us a little bit later. Now, we have given the title to this lecture, Naturarchy, moving towards nature, because we think it is important that we see this as a future a thing tending to the future. The name of Naturarchy. In the meantime, I will share my screen and you will see some slides of the process that has been developing at the JRC since 2022. Now, the name of Naturarchy emerged from our readings on law and nature, where we try to create a bridge between the policies of the European Commission on the one hand, the science that is being applied here in the Joint Research Center that hosts the SciArt project, and then the rich effervescences found today in art, philosophy, and humanities. These are often driven by new research and new questions, and all grapple with what we by now call a change of paradigm, even if this might seem a tired expression. The research initiated from Michel Serres' idea of the Rouseau. He presented the UN body like the International Atomic Agency, and that would take up the defense of nature, provided that nature would get the grounds, because we have been that the rights to nature would be granted. Sorry. WAFL in CSU stands for water, air, fire, earth, and life. It is a joke, of course, and he explicitly mentions the Belgian WAFL, the waffle, but I don't think he was unaware of the English sense of the word waffling. Anyway, we needed another term and we came up with Naturarchy. We moved then on to the natural contract, and even it is by now more than 40 years old, and it's an important reference point for philosophers, artists, and others. I want to quickly recap the main points as far as we can recap a work by Michel Serres. So the natural contract is in the first place a book on the philosophy of law, and it looks at the reality of how the law from its first collectivities has governed human activities, and how difficult it was to acquire legal personhood. It looks at the history and the prehistory of the human, and it looks at how, at a certain point, certain groups or persons or entities, including entities like science, were granted legal personhood, and how difficult that process is if you think that even in our societies, it's only in the last century that women or other categories achieved legal personhood. But there is a social contract that anyhow binds all human collectivity since the very first beginnings, and we know that from Rouseau, even if Serres' interpretation is a little bit wider. When he proposed a natural contract, he proposes it explicitly as an extension of the social contract, and wanting to bring in the relationship between humanity and the natural worlds into this space of the law. Just in the same manner, he says, as the social contract was unwritten and ancient societies followed formal declarations of war, followed the law when they had to use it. The natural contract is already in place because it is unwritten as a social contract. It is in place in virtue of a of a scientific and technological prowess. Now we know that we can not only destroy the earth with bombs, but we are also strangling nature and biodiversity by our many cars, planes, ships, dams, cities, etc. This, Serres contends, puts us in a situation of equipotence with nature. For our ancestors, nature was the sublime, something that overwhelmed them. But we have put ourselves on an equal level, and that provokes an unwritten set of rules and obligations, whether we want it or not. In order to explain this equipotence, he then uses the concept of a world object. That is a human artifact of which at least one dimension, such as time or space or speed or energy, arrives at the same level as the Earth and is capable of influencing her. These world objects, such as ballistic missiles or nuclear waste, weigh on the Earth and change the way that she handles herself. Other world objects would be satellites for speed or the internet for space. He uses this concept to highlight the interconnectedness and interdependence between humans and the natural world, and challenging traditional notions of objectivity and subjectivity. Now, this would bring us too far from this short pitch, but the idea that the local ascends into the global, and that by now we live and walk within a world object instead of having an object before us that we can analyze with detachment. This has consequences on how we perceive subject and objects and other dichotomies that are used in philosophy. And that's a very illuminating part, so I would recommend you firmly to read it. But the end is, of course, what we all know, that nature depends on our actions, but all our actions also heavily depend on nature. And we are seeing that with natural disasters of the last years. And he ends then with this concise observation that we must make peace with ourselves in order to save the world, and peace with the world in order to save ourselves. And that also we see very clear in these years of wars, etc. So Naturarchy tries to capture these ideas with a neologism. No? But of course, and Katharina has already mentioned it, there are lots of things that we have been investigating, starting from what the current state is of the fight for the rights of nature, which I can tell you was much worse when we started out than it is today, because we see that the subject is really searching, but also how to understand the human and the non-human, how to avoid, in other words, humanizing non-human intelligences, how to work and live with these intelligences, but also what would really sustainable technology look like. Also, how can we bring in certain of these concepts into our personal lives, which will help to bring about the transformation that we are looking for. And yes, of course, one of the ideas is also to bring concepts like these, concepts like the decolonisation of nature, into this august body of the European Commission and the public debate that she manages. So we want to capture this profound and deep transformation of our culture that is happening today, no? Pointing out that if we are to be successful in combating environmental degradation, we must also transform our culture on a very deep level. And there the word of archy now is, I think, very useful, because it refers, of course, to words like matriarchy and patriarchy, but it is an invitation to put ourselves under the government of something that goes beyond our own limited vantage point.
Adriaan, sorry to interrupt you. You gave me the horrible role of timekeeping.
Yes.
So I just wanted to let you know that just one or 2 minutes left. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then I will quickly come to a conclusion. So we want to embrace all these changes that are happening and bring them more into the center of the European debate. And there we also think of what is happening with the digital. It is ages ago that Latour launched the idea of the Parliament of Things, but there are many voices that now are talking about how collectivity has been replaced by something that we can call connectivity, and how these non-human digital artifacts are governing our lives and are becoming more and more players within an environment that goes way beyond the old idea of a natural environment. If we only look at AI, it seems that things are happening so quickly that we should not be too far away from the moment that an AI would acquire some rights too, and maybe also avatars walking around in our world. So the combination of these both, with the possibilities of AI helping us to understand things like non-human intelligence, is there really a language of trees, and can AIs help us to understand it? It's not only about folding proteins, helping science with AI, it's also using AI to bridge this gap that we have with nature. So there are many instances that are clamoring for new rights. And the general question that I would pose to the people that are on the panel is, what kind of alliance can you see between the digital and nature, and that can help us to bring ourselves closer, living in a real symbiosis with nature? Thank you. Maybe I shall ask first John Palmisino to give his pitch, his view on these subjects.
Thank you, Adriaan, and thank you very much for inviting me to this laser meeting on Naturarchy. I'm going to share my screen in just a second, that I need to start the presentation. Do you all see it?
Yes, we do.
I've been asked to follow up on Adriaan with a pitch, and my pitch is very simple. We need climate peace. And the difficulties that Michel Serres' text poses are obviously direct both to the notion of climate and to the notion of peace and war. In climate, in nature, there's no peace. There's only controversies. There's only complex renegotiations. And the renegotiation, I think, is where the concept of Naturarchy that Adriaan and his team are putting forward is so crucial for contemporary challenges. We need to articulate in our practices all the structures through which we consider notions of bonded entities and how they can recombine in this complex time. I would like to start by outlining what we could do to achieve a condition where a new form of public diplomacy towards climate peace can articulate. And I would like to start with a very simple question. How heavy is a city? It's a simple question that opens up many difficult other domains that have to do with the possibility of composing a possible peace. What is a city? How far does it extend? Who are the citizens? What are the relationships between the fluxes, that material, energy, and information fluxes that characterize what we used to call the city and the new form of the planetary? This is also a very simple question that has been running as a background in territorial agency, the practice that I run together with Anne-Sophie Renskog, for many years of collaboration with scientists, anthropologists, and lawyers and artists, concerning the rise of a new figure, the Anthropocene, the new condition. How heavy is a city has also a very simple answer. It's 30 trillion tons. This is the rough back of the envelope calculation of the amounts that are the mass that are the sum of all elements that humans have constructed. 30 trillion tons is a very long number. It's the equivalent of all the biosphere. Or to put you another figure in mind, because 30 trillion tons is so big, everywhere 30 centimeters of rubble. And this new figure, what we used to call the city, is now of a planetary dimension. It's what Peter Haff, who just passed recently, called the technosphere. And the new dimensions of technology, the material, information, and energy fluxes that sustain humans, is now of a dimension and magnitude similar to the other spheres, the other paradigms of the Earth system. The atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the cryosphere, the lithosphere, and so on. What this new figure entails, and this is the difficult part, is that we are in a complete different relationship with the Earth. We used to think that technology protected us from the very complex processes of the Earth. And now with the combustion of fossil fuels, we've modified all cycles of biogeochemical relations of the Earth system. And that means that we are seeing a situation where our technology, our information, our energy and material fluxes are becoming the impingent structures onto our livelihood. And this is creating a very complex inversion of agency, which I think is the key element of the introduction of Michel Serres' the new natural contract, where you try to understand the mud, the bogland, and not only the figures of the fighters. So in this new situation, the technosphere appears really as a very complex undoing of what we thought was the objects of design, the objects of construction, the objects of planning, the object also of juridical management. We tended to think that we were in charge of the spaces of the technosphere, that humans were the largest producers of coherence of our own spaces. In reality, the rapid rise of the technosphere and its planetary dimension indicate that it is now an entity that is largely self-organizing. It is largely self-organizing and follows dynamics that are outside our control. We endeavor more time as humans to sustain the technosphere rather than the other way around. And this creates all kinds of problems, and namely the major problem is the shift in understanding of what is it that humans can do to safeguard the possibility of inhabitation of the planet once we've unleashed the technosphere. We tend to think that there might be that this is a problem that is all within our hands, how we will organize ourselves and how we will organize our laws, our collaborations, our structures of mutuality and solidarity. In reality, the technosphere is following a dynamic by itself. It's interacting with the biosphere, it's interacting with the structures of the atmosphere, and very differently from the other paradigms of the Earth, it's leaving behind enormous amount of rubble, of detritus, of waste. A forest never drowns in leaves. A forest always recycles. The erosion of the lithosphere doesn't simply accumulate. It's complex dynamics of regeneration. And what is peculiar about the technosphere, about the new dimension of what we used to call the city, is that it doesn't recycle. It just leaves an incredible amount of waste, namely in the sky, in the form of augmented levels of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, and everywhere on the surface and in the waters of our planet. So the question for us and about climate peace, which I think is the key demand that is posed by the notion of Naturarchy and Michel Serres, is how to deal with this inversion of understanding of what we used to call progress. There's a global energy usage over industrialization period. You see this rapid rise, which was always associated with a notion of becoming better, becoming larger, becoming more able to articulate our capacity to survive. And suddenly we start understanding that this is a bad, it's not a good situation. And when we start understanding the transformations that are associated with energy use in relationship to the detritus that energy intensification leaves behind, we can look at a graph of this kind, which is the same data as before, but on percentage level. So in the vertical axis, you have 100%, and you start seeing the wood, the biomass corresponding to the formation of city-states, taken over by the rise of the coal and the articulation of large industries and large bureaucracies, national bureaucracies, parliamentarian states and empires, and then the rapid rise after the war of the oil and the international dimension, which I think the European Union doesn't quite fit in. That is a far more interesting coalition of notions of sovereignties. And the question is, once we move into the new renewable age, where we will have to transform our capacity to deal with energy, we will need a new form of a city. And this is the question of how to design a city, how to design citizenship, how to design a cosmopolitical dimension in that, and how to start thinking new practices of engagement and rearticulation of what we think is the role of creative and intelligent communities in democratizing the technosphere. And democratizing the technosphere, that means in making the technosphere equitable from all its components. The technosphere is now engaging with all forms of life. We are the top of the food system, and we eat everything, we destroy everything. The question is a really complex dimension, but I would like to stay for the last minute of my presentation on this graph and indicate that, contrary to the current debate on energy consumption, the notion of the technosphere allows us to understand that we need a higher energy society, not a lower energy society. If we are in the current debate is to reduce, to go local, to reduce consumption. This doesn't allow in any way, and this is really the basic of thermodynamics, to think how we're going to recycle, how are we going to take the technosphere back into the cycles of the planet. What we need is far higher energy with a far higher levels of recycling of the technological mass that we've unleashed and that has transformed the Earth. So Climate Peace is a project of Naturarchy, most probably, but it's also a project of high energy, high recycling, and it demands a new imaginary of what a city is, what it means to be a citizen, not from a human perspective, but really from this flat interrelationship between all the components of what the weak of heart would call the Earth system, and many of us would call Gaia. So pitch is for climate peace.
Thank you so much, John. And that's indeed a very clear pitch and a very difficult one too. I wonder what Philippa would want to say on that.
Thank you, Adriaan. So I'm here to bring hopefully a happy marriage between sharing an experience of experimental education project that is having a happy life with a civic and institutional reality that exists around, within, and beyond the experience and the importance of pedagogy and education across the arts, the humanities, and sciences in our current deranged times. Some years ago, in one of the inaugural lectures that we have at the Institute Art and Nature, which is part of the Fachhochschule of the Northwestern Switzerland in Basel, we had the privilege of having a wonderful keynote speech by Diego Blas, who's an astrophysicist at the time affiliated with CERN in Geneva, and who was sharing his research on black holes. And at the end of his research, one of our master students, and our students are bachelor and master students in fine arts, raised his hand and said, well, your presentation is extraordinary. The images you showed are very compelling and fascinating, these images of black holes and of supernovas. But what's the purpose of your research? And the astrophysicist he couldn't believe an art student was asking him what was the purpose of his work and of his research. And I thought that precise moment in which this very skilled professional is being challenged in a way that seems almost inconceivable to him, and in which an art student is trying to grasp the necessity for scientific research that is, to his perception, so experimental that is almost abstract, that inaugurated the possibility for a dialogue on the shared epistemologies, shared methodologies, or at least shared questions that the practices of scientific research and artistic research can have. Also allowing art to position itself as an epistemological tradition as valid, as important, and this would probably be the core of my pitch, as those of other, specifically hard sciences, in bringing, in creating visions, knowledges, and relationships to the world we live in, and allowing for fundamental reconsideration of the state in which humanity is occupying and dominating the world, and also an important reconsideration of what is wrong with our rights and wrong with the laws that we have made, and with this very unnatural contract that we have been establishing with the world around us and that we share. I'm going to, in order to give some examples and make them more tangible about the kind of experiments and the kind of pedagogical tools that we have been adopting at Institute Kunst and beyond, I'm going to share my screen and go through some of the projects we've been working on. First of all, deconstructing spaces, thinking that the classroom and the parliament at the end are not that different in terms of architectonic configuration, and how space dictates the kind of relationships that people establish with power and amongst themselves, and with hierarchies. So something that we consistently try to do is to deconstruct and rethink spatial arrangement within educational contexts, diluting relationship between guest speakers, students, fellows, and teaching staff, and experimenting with different ways in which bodies come together, bodies share moments of discomfort, bodies have to renegotiate their position and their visibility and even their physicality. Oh, no, I can't. Oh, yes. And also inviting lecturers that actually come from the fields of sciences to come and share their work to our students who are art students, as I mentioned. And this is always interesting, the conversations that happen before the seminars, in which researchers, as in this case, Alex Jordan, who's a marine biologist who runs the Jordan Lab for group behavior at the Max Planck Institute in Constance, in which we have to have several conversations to try to understand how the languages, how the jargon and the vocabulary of an area such as that of marine biology, for instance, can be shared and is appropriate to that of an art group, but also then, very interestingly, how a group of artists may challenge the graphics, the aesthetics, the presentations, and help someone who comes from science to actually think the way in which scientific knowledge is shared, is presented, and is popularized as well, and therefore these different languages and different sensibilities, how they attune to one another and can actually evolve hand in hand. Similarly to what we have been doing with someone who has been a frequent guest at our seminars, Volker Sommer, who's the head of evolutionary anthropology department at University College London, and who's also a fellow of the Linnean Society, and within his work at the Linnean Society, he's proposing the change of the genus that defines the species of the Homo sapiens in order to move forward to a more integrated relationship with its fellows, great apes, since the Homo sapiens at the end remains alone as a species and not related to the other great apes. And also, again, how do we share, how do we problematize, how to create a space for science to exist in a freer way, but also a way that is open to the questioning and to the methods that people who are coming from the arts may have. And similar to the way in which we have invited a marine biologist who's affiliated with the New York University, David Gruber, to present the research he's been doing in collaboration with artists, with musicians, with people who come exactly from the traditions of the arts and humanities, and to share how the input of someone like Joan Jonas, for instance, who is a very established artist who represented the United States in the Venice Biennale a few years ago, and who is about to have a big retrospective of her work at the MoMA, how marine biologists like David Gruber has actually been hearing and been learning from the lessons of Joan Jonas, for instance, in relation to how machine intelligence can help scientists to communicate with mammals. And for instance, something very interesting that emerged from the conversations between David Gruber and Joan Jonas is that Joan Jonas at a certain point said, well, we can actually use AI to understand what a whale may say. We may actually understand that a whale may say something very banal, like come close, or it's time to eat, or may say something extremely poetic, but in a way of poetry that we may even not understand it, in the same way that a Western mindset struggles to understand a haiku. And where do we stay in this desire for communication when understanding and communicating may not mean the same thing? No? Or we have experiments where we try to invite our students to attune themselves to the ways of relating to the Umwelt or to the perceptive system of birds. What does it mean to have two eyes that are lateral, and what kind of images can you grab when your two eyes are not frontal as a human, but are actually on the lateral side, and experiment with them in ways that are very funny, but also very, very interesting to challenge perceptive modes, or observing fragments of meteorites, and together with, again, the team at CERN, and learn how even a city like Basel, in a city like Basel, you can find fragments of celestial bodies that actually hit the surface of the earth and are still with us. Or inviting people who are more on the side of activism and who are, again, working to challenge given relationships to exhibitionary systems, challenge the zoological apparatus, challenge even the place of the zoo and the legitimacy to exhibit non-humans within our large cities, and to question the validation of these systems of display that continue to rely on this triangulation between entertainment, education, and spectacle, no? And this is the case when we invited Jonathan Burt, who has been working on zoological gardens, to come and share his work with us, and do this in dialogue with one of the biologists who work at the Zoo of Basel, and have a conversation where actually tense and complicated matters are discussed.
Philippa, sorry, it's the me again.
Up.
1 minute to go.
Okay, thank you. And then understanding how these emerge to people outside the school, in works that are presented here at the Ocean Space, a space that John knows very well as well, in Venice, through, again, works that disturb the city, as disturb the city of Venice, or that emerge through a large research project that is took the shape of a biennale, including some of our students, where we were actually questioning what is a person, but largely inspired by the work of a lawyer called Rada de Souza, and thinking how the matters of legal personhood could be understood within the UNESCO heritage site as that of the Dolomites, and within the format of an exhibition, and how education, exhibition, and ongoing questioning to the organization of society can actually contribute to give a sense of responsibility and entitlement to the artists of our present future, which are the ones we work with. And I'll stay here, and yes, thank you.
Thank you, Philippa. And I think it must be clear by now that we really think that putting together all these different points of view and all these different angles at which to look at things is one of the threats and methods of the SciArt project too. And so I have had some very recognition moments there. And continuing with that, I would also now ask Roger Strand, to come in and give us his point of view. Please, Roger.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me sufficiently well? Yes. Very good. And I'm going to share my screen. Yes. So first of all, thank you very much for this invitation. As Adriaan already said, I work at the University of Bergen and also at a micro NGO called the European Center for Governance and Complexity. And my role here today is to convey some of the experience that we've had together with the European Environment Agency. And I should stress that I do not talk on behalf of the European Environment Agency today, although I would like to pass their greetings on and share that both the agency and ourselves in the ECGC would like to express gratitude, but also admiration for the important work that is going on in the science and art collaboration at the JRC. In the preparations to this talk, we talked about the crisis of imagination in the kind of, our current deranged times that were already mentioned. And I think that the constructive work is, of course, ongoing everywhere or in many sites. But if I think of my own experience with European Union institutions for more than 20 years, it's been especially grateful to be in collaborations with JRC and the European Environment Agency, which I think are two nodes actually since the 1990s that have done something constructive on the side of the crisis of imagination, which is a crisis of imagination, but also of thinking. And to quote Donna Haraway, right, we don't only need to rethink things, but we need to think. And that is part of the problem. That is a sort of also an activity under pressure. What I will talk about are some experiences that are ongoing in and around the European Environment Agency, which is closer to the world of public administration and public policy than the initiatives that perhaps we've heard about so far. And I will take as the point of departure this week. We may discuss whether these so-called hockey stick diagrams function as a good representation of the deranged times, but at least it is a common point of departure from that world of public policy and public administration and environmental management, to just see these graphs of how the technosphere has been increasing. And there are hundreds of these, right? And they all have more or less the same shape of figures flying into almost infinity and in many ways threatening nature, threatening the biosphere, threatening the ecosystems. And of course, this is not new. These are figures almost a generation after Michel Serres' The Natural Contract. We have been knowing this thing things now for a long time. We know this. We also know, especially if we try to be serious about it, that some of our strategies that are important on the, let's say, on the political scene, like trying to create global decoupling of resource use and economic growth, have failed. They do not work, or at least they have not worked so far. The economic lines, they coincide completely with the material footprint, regardless of whether we install recycling policies or circular economies or whatever we are talking about. So there is the growing recognition also on the side of public policy, I would say. And this slide illustrates it. It's a slide showing the former director of the EEA presenting, giving a talk, public talk about the situation that we're in. And we see now that even our European Union institutions are engaging in the kind of vocabulary that we saw from academic literature with deep ecology, strong sustainability, written Weber, wicked problems. And of course, if not Serre is often quoted, it is this conceptual universe of admitting that the technological fixes do not work, that problems are wicked, that they are complex, and that the strategies that we're currently having in governance simply have not delivered the results that we need. This is perhaps my favorite illustration of this kind of insight, and the quote may be known to some of you, and I will just read the first sentence. The basic problem goes even deeper. It's the way that humanity has taken up technology and its development according to an undifferentiated and one-dimensional paradigm. This paradigm exalts the concept of a subject who, using logical and rational procedures, progressively approaches and gains control over an external object. And this was already criticized or analyzed at length in previous contributions today. You may know this quote. It's from the encyclical letter of Pope Francis, actually, and I present it to our students in sustainability. So what to do about this? What is it that humans can do, given that we have unleashed the technosphere, as it was already commented on? So one small initiative that we have been working on with the European Environment Agency is to explore a notion of governance in complexity, not of complexity, where we try to analyze this this condition that we have known perhaps for 30, 40 years, or perhaps much longer, about not being in control, not being able to use science to predict exactly how to navigate the world, the technosphere, the biosphere, or even ourselves with certainty and control, and asking what does this entail for governance in the traditional sense of public governance. And without going into detail in this pitch, we suggest this perspective of governance in complexity as at least the minimum insight that when we attempt to govern a system, we have to be aware that the system cannot be perfectly known and controlled, and that we ourselves are actually part of or interconnected with the system to be governed. This is in the Anthropocene the invariable condition of governance. What does it entail? It entails perhaps a rethinking of our capacities for knowing and acting, and suggesting ways of acting together with nature and on nature and together with ourselves in ways that are less assertive and more adaptive. And the word adaptive is of course, perhaps in this sense, sufficiently vague. We played with the duality active and passive, or active and receptive, and immediately you see the flags, right? Because this is not what the institutional world likes to hear, that we should not be exerting masculine force and trying to control everything. Now, in the presentation of Naturarchy that I found on the website, it says that it wants to reimagine the Western relation of human and non-human. Of course, one thing we could do if we want to reimagine the Western relation of human and non-human is to ask what kind of relations have we had before we became Western or in the places that were not Western. And to my great pleasure, it seems like in this report that we're crafting on governance in complexity, we are allowed to quote at least the two first lines of this fabulous chapter of Laozi's Tao Te Ching, where he simply asks in a poetic way, trying to control the world, I see you won't succeed. The world is a spiritual vessel and cannot be controlled. Here we're not talking about the 1980s, we're talking about a text that is probably more than 2,500 years old. And we should think that there is a lot to learn from history about how this has been. I mean, the current predicament of the Anthropocene is new, but the underlying dilemmas of sinking into the sand conveyed by the painting of Goya of the dualents has been there forever, perhaps. How to think about this of this in practice? We try to develop, for the purpose of a world of public governance and public policy, principles of governance in complexity that where you will immediately see the place for initiatives that combine science and art, I think, with a larger focus on experimentation, on participation, on anticipation, and last but not least here, care, and try to map these on these predicaments of governance in complexity. This is not entirely new at the European Environment Agency. This work like this has in some sense been going on since the 1990s, and their strong role in the development of policies on the precautionary principle. And I would like to mention this little briefing from the EA that came last year on rethinking the relationship with nature from the point of view of the biodiversity threats. And again, the EA is not alone here, although this is an EA illustration. It is basically taken from the IPBS, the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So I think we see that, in a way, that the time is ripe to see that there is a will to think and rethink in many institutions of public policy and boundary organizations between science and policy. We try to collect good examples of various kinds that range from the mindful initiative that you see in the middle of this slide in the UK to various kinds of system thinking, care thinking, more inclusive practices, etc. And I think we have so much to learn from science and art collaborations. Let me end with what is currently in the draft of our report, the final paragraph, where we come back to the question of Laozi and this in vain trying to control the world. So what we argue for is a call for a change in mindset. Perhaps not exactly the same call for a change in mindset that I find in the Naturarchy project, but they are strongly related. Perhaps less going into the discourse of rights to nature, but surely back into the idea of the dualents of Goya and the necessity of rethinking and reshaping conviviality between humans, but also between humans and the non-humans that goes beyond the social world and redefining the social world. Because, and this is perhaps one way to address some of the questions that Adriaan posed at the beginning, to the extent that we can make progress, it's difficult to see that we can make progress without being able to include those who have different views on what that progress would be. And by that, I will stop the presentation and give the word back to the chair.
Wait a second, Adriaan, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself. It makes you think back a little bit, Roger, to the more political moments of Michel Serres, where he says that our institutions are old and ossified and can't cope with the modern world anymore. I think that John is doing something heroic when he tries to think about cities, but on the other hand, trying to change administrations, knowing them from the inside, is really a heroic effort. It's maybe good to think a little bit. I don't think Derek has arrived already, but it might be good to go on. You all mentioned art and science, no? What is the contribution that art science research can give to these wicked problems, or as the term goes today, polycrisis? What can we do? And how would you, what kind of positive action would you see in art science collaborations that can move forward this debate, which is basically the central tenet of the Naturarchy question or edition, no?
Can I ask, did you ask me or did you ask everybody?
All three of you, and you volunteered to start first.
Okay. I am thinking about the examples that Philippa showed with, especially I was struck by the pigeon exercise, or the boxes on the head. One of the questions we were given in advance was the opportunities of the digital and the digital as a bridge to connect to nature. I may reveal myself as old-fashioned, middle-aged man here. Of course, it's futile and stupid to be against digital technologies. We would not have had this meeting today if we didn't have digital technologies, so that's fine. But in the tradition of deep ecology, I think that one bridge between us and nature, in that sense, has to go through the body.
Has to go through?
Has to go through the body. And that a problem in, again, Western relationship between man and or human and non-human is that we reside too much in our minds, and that we have to engage as bodily individuals again in many ways. And this doesn't preclude the use of the digital, but I do think that, for instance, in my own work, the most important thing we can do with not only students, but also policymakers, is to take them out of the ugly concrete buildings in the city where we are currently being, and taking them out into other landscapes. Perhaps that can be done digitally, I don't know, but I would prefer it the old-fashioned way. I'll stop there.
Maybe I grab from there, Roger, because I really appreciate your answer, and I couldn't agree more with it. And I would even maybe go a little bit further, and sometimes it strikes me that if we go back in time, when we go to the Constitution of the Modern Project, one of the bastions for the arguing of the difference, let's say, between humans, or even some humans and other humans and non-humans, and this separation with what became that troubled concept that is nature, was not based on scientific evidence, but actually almost on an aesthetic level, which is the relationship to the divine, that the divine choose a human form to incarnate, no? And going back to the matter of bodies, no? But also the consciousness of having a body is a consciousness of vulnerability, and in as much as we often discuss care and love for nature, I think that there is still a discourse of fear and of lack of knowledge, but mostly of fear. I think most people are still afraid of nature more than really eager to encounter it. And I don't think it's very fascinating in this sense to just observe John's research on cities, because cities become also very safe spaces, because they are spaces where the only non-humans, or visible non-humans, because we all carry a multiplicity of life that probably is remote controlling us much more than we think of, but also that cities became spaces where the casual encounter with a non-human that is threatening is almost unexistent, no? And the life forms that exist are the ones that manage to adapt to our anthropogenic realms. So I do think that a large part of it comes from changing indeed. And and you mentioned care in a couple of occasions, and I do think that care comes with love. And I sound utterly romantic, and I know this, but I think that a rewriting of a relationship to the world around us comes from a rethinking of affects, from fear to love, even if love can be violent and can be abusive. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to initiate therapy sessions for a very problematic relationship between humans and the non-natural world, where there is a systematic abusive relationship. But I do think that it starts from the consciousness of a body that is an animal body amongst many others. And what does this mean in terms of the kind of acceptance of vulnerability, but also acceptance of belonging, no? Of course, this is on a poetic and romantic idea, but I do believe in this. And in relation to the question of the digital, again, words matter, and I don't think it's a coincidence that the word digital comes from fingers, always reminding us that the hand is at the end is the interface and is the form of relationship. And as much as we want to call it artificial intelligence, this intelligence was largely generated by us, and for the time being is reflecting our biases, our limits, and may well, and is already on the verge of gaining its own entity. What I find fascinating is from the moment we are creating this capacity and this intelligence, and of course there's a big difference between the digital world and artificial intelligence, and I'm more focusing now on artificial intelligence. I can't avoid myself thinking, from the moment we are creating a consciousness, we are also creating another potential source of suffering. And maybe it's also important to think, what are the ethics that we want to have in relation to these potential consciousness that we are creating, and their needs and their necessities and their potential suffering. And I do believe, I also think that everything starts within the body and the relationship between one body and all bodies, but that the artificial is also something that is not far, is something that is profoundly connected to our bodies. And even if not having an organic body, it doesn't mean that it doesn't have or it will not have affects and needs. Maybe I stop here.
Thank you so much, Philippe. I see John readying himself.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up two elements. The first one has to do with maybe time and whether there is time. And those of us who've been involved in collaborations on and the efforts to think the transformation of institutions towards a parliament of nature, parliaments of things, maybe we really underestimated that there's not enough time. There's not enough time, and there's also maybe a impossibility to think that the representations of the problems, and maybe the transfer of the problem to a new set of representation, maybe based on affect and senses. And I do appreciate what both Philip and Roger are aiming at, but maybe we got it wrong, because we've been talking about this for almost 40 years. I'm starting to feel a little bit annoyed by the fact that I'm doing this since I'm a teenager. And the question of time to me is then really associated with the question of the digital that Adriaan is bringing about, because it's quite obvious that the information fluxes that we're dealing with are of a magnitude that are completely unreadable to humans. That's simply unreadable. It's impossible. No, it's not that you're going to print out Google and start reading it in the evening. So the question of association of Naturarchy and the challenge, I think, that you are putting on the table, Adriaan and Claudia and Katerina and everyone, I think really is a challenge that needs to bring into question whether we should first change mindset and then act, or whether we should basically start the two things at the same time. And I'm not so sure that art and science are here to change the way we perceive the world in order to then act better. I think that we should really move art science to act better rather than perceive the world better. And I think this is really a question of attention and urgency. Attention is a situation that everyone who is basically involved in the world can associate with alertness. And the state of perennial war that we live in is the right moment to act. We cannot simply delay until we will have the right feelings, the right affect, the right collaborations between humans and all the other critters. I think that we really need to start thinking action as a new form of artifice, as a new form of engagement with a world that is crossed from all sides. And in that sense, I think that the notion of Naturarchy is not a preliminary notion. It's an active notion. It's how to act. It's not the preliminary to action, but it really has to do with transforming all aspects. And I saw also that Roger mentioned the Deep Ecology Project, and with all its implication. Maybe that is also a project that we need to start understanding whether it's being addressed really as a condition of efficacy, or whether it has been a parochial project, for instance, eliminating structures of violence from among people, conditions of the colonial and post-colonial dimensions of ecology needs to be taken into account as well. So I'm thinking, my only preoccupation is how to deal with science and technology, art, as an action rather than an intimation to change our mindset. I think this is where a pedagogical approach is important. I think it's where political dimension of this project to me is resonating.
Thank you. I don't know, Derek, if you want to chip in.
Sure. I've just finished with the presentation of my students. Thank you for your patience. I just put on the chat 2 lines from your pitch, which were from Michel Serres, and I would like to start from there. I won't take too much time, but I just want to think it's a good thing to start from his reflections, and they are here. You can see them. Serres uses this concept to highlight the interconnectedness and interdependence between humans and the natural world, challenging traditional notion of objectivity and subjectivity. while I was away, you may have talked about this. And it's a very, for me, it's a fundamental understanding of where we are in terms of naturarchy. Because fundamentally what happens is we have divided, have separated ourselves from the world and from the earth at the moment we started writing and reading and writing phonologically. If you compare our writing system to the Chinese writing system, you realize they never separated from the world. And they never separated from the world because they were not dealing with language. They were dealing with ideas, concept, and they were related to the world as a unit and not as something that, like ourselves, was distant from us. And it's very important because that is what has made people, instead of being responsible for their economy, instead of understanding the real meaning of economy, which is the regulation of the house, the management of the house, as opposed to the management of money or financial issues, have developed in everyone an exploitative approach that we are still continuing today. It's extraordinarily difficult to resist. People who are resisting are threatened with prison. In England, in various places. So the idea that one could actually try to do something entirely different is still facing huge obstacle. So how do you get over it? Well, the first thing is to understand that literacy, writing systems are actually operating system of culture. The differences between the institutions of Europe and the West and the institution of the East is that they both respond to different operating systems. And these operating systems, the foundation of operating system is obviously language. But the moment it turns into writing, it then creates institutions and philosophy and different ways of thinking about the world. What is the new operating system? It's the digital. And the digital operating system has a tremendously different relationship, both to language and to humans. It doesn't deal with meaning. It produces meaning, but it doesn't deal with meaning. It deals with order. It puts things in order. It deals with sequences. It deals with the creation of all kinds of new relationship between people and the world. It is not particularly favorable to naturarchy, but it is not bad either. It has done two very important things. One, it has translated all hardware into software. And that is extremely useful because it has liquefied the planet and made it manageable in entirely different ways. And so the point is that, and the second thing it has done is that it is presenting itself as a transition to the next era. We are already at the end of the digital era, and the next era is the quantum era. And the quantum era is right back to the, I would say, the Chinese approach to the planet. Right back to the, I know that the Chinese are doing lots of horrible things to the planet right now too, but the foundation of their sensibility is to actually be much more aware of how the world should be. So I have been writing a book. It took me 4 years, and during those 4 years, I was looking desperately for how could I find something that would change the sensibility of people, not just what would be a quantum sensibility. And I didn't find it, except when I read the proofs last week, and I realized I had known it all the time. 10 years ago, I wrote another book, collected essays, in fact, on the point of being. And the idea was just that, changing the point of being, point of view to the point of being. Instead of standing away and judging and looking at the world as something that one can exploit, participating in it. The point of being is actually a tactile relationship to the planet. Whenever you hear bad news, horrible things like what happens in Gaza or what happens in Ukraine, you physically feel it. You feel it mentally, but you also feel it physically. And the condition of life to all of us today has been destroyed. Horrible, has been made horrible by these constant things that we are obliged to see because the media give them to us. The physical relationship to the planet is a very important thing that we should actually promote. And my message is this one. scientist and an artist actually now have a golden opportunity of working together in order to promote a sensibility precisely of this participatory relationship to the planet. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, and I think that's very spot on. It also aligns with what John said about art as action. But maybe Claudia there wants to chip in. Claudia?
Wait a second, I have to unmute you. Oh, there you are. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks for all these talks and contributions. I think, so how to bring it all together now? So I think we just had quite a few things that all of you touched upon. And actually, I wanted to share and to give you a very sneak preview of something before. Where I think that's also spot on with what you all said.
Maybe you have to explain that, huh?
In a second. So just a little bit of a sneak preview to our Naturarchy exhibition. What I hear you all say is that there is a need to change, and John was very explicit about it. There is a need to act. And Katharina mentioned at the beginning that one of the works will also deal with tipping points, but it will also deal with the tipping point. So where are we at in our society now, when we need to act and when we need to change? And I think what we try to do with this exhibition, what I also hear all of you saying now, is that there needs to be some kind of action taken, bringing together all the different knowledges and experiences and technologies that we have at hand. And maybe what we can do with this exhibition and with all these conversations is to convey this urgency and to understand how we could relate to each other in order to act, and not to ask more questions and not to ask for more studies. Maybe also quoting one of the JRC scientists in the past few months, where he says, when do we ask, when do we stop to ask for more studies about what we know, but when do we ask to act? Yeah, so I'm sorry, I just had to go for a quick note. So I was not with Derek's last notion, but what I hear from all these different ideas is that there is a lot about complex systems, and how do we deal with complex systems, and how do we deal with something that we cannot really control. So I heard this from Roger, from John, and I think also from Derek, at least thinking about how do you create new relationships, and also from Philippa when she really talks about the embodiment and thinking about relationships and how to connect everything. And there I actually also want to jump back to this question about art science collaboration and why we can do and how we can bring this as a special partner for working with science and creating action. I think artists have a very special abilities on different levels. So artists have their artistic practice. So with this artistic practice, they can get loose from certain ways of methods and certain ways of thinking, and create or pull together different contexts and make us think differently and make us create these new connections, but also make us aware of these elements like emotions that Philippa was talking about love, about dignity. Dignity will be also something that's very important in the Naturarchy exhibition, and trying to create new relationships and thinking about new relationships. On the other hand, again, talking about the embodiment and also the digital that you talked about, arts have a very strong focus in dealing with aesthetics, and aesthetics is not only how we perceive, but also the elements how we sensory perceive. So what is the sensible knowledge that we have, and how can we also go beyond pure rationalization and pure rational communication. And so the idea is also how can we combine this digital rational knowledge and the hierarchy that Derek talked about when he talked about the digital is also something hierarchical and not so much dealing with meaning. How can we create the ideas of combining this hierarchical, the rational or quasi-rational hierarchies with something that we know bodily and through different sensories and sensory knowledge. And the third part is actually also that art has the competency to tap into culture and connect to different cultures and relate the perspectives of what we do scientifically or in our societies to the different cultural perspectives and activities that are going on. And I think through this we try with Naturarchy on very diverse levels to create some kind of actions and some kind of idea of urgency, and yeah, and actually also bring up these important topics that all of you were also actually talking about, and a sense of action, but also bring it to a table where people with any kind of background can just come in and start a discussion.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Unfortunately, I have to start thinking about the end of this talk. Maybe somebody wants to add to what Claudia just said. Philippa, John, Derek, Roger. Yes, Roger, please.
Yeah, perhaps an ambiguous comment on the notion that we have to act. So I think we all agree, right? We have to act, but there are also many people who agree that we have to act, and what they are doing and what they have been doing, and perhaps what we have been doing for decades, made the problems worse. So I would like to qualify the urgency discourse in one particular way, I think, and that is what we see is that there's a lot of will to act, actually, but a lot of it within our mainstream institutions is that it's on the condition that we will accept any change, technological change, ecological change, human change, to avoid change. So you can, in a way, we can accept any change as long as we don't change the basic condition of a mass consumption capitalist society, where the welfare and affluence and even longevity of some people on the planet is kept the same. So I think that is perhaps one thing that, in order to make it proceed further, we have to think about that there are real conflicts there, and think about venues and trajectories for non-violent forms of expression of conflict. And that I would think as actually one of the particular functions of science and art in our society.
Thank you. Actually, this is something very, very refreshing to hear from you. Also because I think this is one of the themes that within the Naturarchy discourse, we had actually a lot of discussions about how to tackle economy, how to tackle degrowth, how to tackle all these dynamics that are actually also keeping certain processes and interests in place can be navigated, because actually often when you lead this conversation about Naturarchy, you get the question in the end, but then how do we survive? How do we keep workplaces in place and so on and so forth? So there's always this kind of negotiation around that. And I think for that, there's also always a question of, and how does an alternative system look like? And I would like to actually go back to something that you said when you quoted Donna Haraway also. It's not only about rethinking, but we also need to think and to think something new.
Thank you, Claudia. I think that gives a very good recap of the entire conversation, because indeed we started with imagination with Roger, and maybe we really have to use our imagination just to find other means of doing it. And as to action, I think, John, one of the humble ambitions of the Naturarchy endeavor has been simply to bring these discussions to more people that are not aware of it, and then thinking of George Monbiot when he says that we don't need 50%, and we need the 20 or the 20-something%. And if these people want to act, then things will start to change. And so I would see that all these discussions are certainly essential conditions for each of us in different positions and in different moments of our lives to make action possible. But if we get to these 20%, then we might maybe see that things can start sliding very, very quickly. I myself have the impression that, more generally speaking, we are at the point of rupture, no? And we feel that the point of rupture is coming closer and closer, and maybe the point of rupture can then quickly bring a change in habits and in attitudes that would not be possible if not each of us was doing the work that he was doing and trying to interact with the world, the surroundings, in such a way that we can continue to move forward these ideas. And I think that with that, I will thank you all 4 and 5 for your presence, for your contributions. From my point of view, it was illuminating to see these different points of view then coming together in the words of Claudia. So thank you, Claudia, for this kind of recap. That also saves me some time. So thank you all, and hope to see you soon for the next laser talk.
Thank you, Adriaan. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. Thank you, John.
Very short, but very pleasurable moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. And I hope to hear or read all of you soon.
Perfect. Bon déjeuner.
You too. Ah.